and welcome to the SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode I'll be discussing the 2012 science fiction action movie John Carter, as directed by Andrew Stanton in his directorial debut, not exactly, but of a live-action feature film, after being heavily involved with Pixar and having only directed the 3 animated Pixar hits, A Bug's Life, of which he co-directed with John Lasseter, Finding Nemo and WALL-E prior to this. The movie is based on the 1912 novel A Princess of Mars, the first book in the Barsoom series of novels by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and was originally intended to actually be part of a trilogy of films, charting the events from the first 3 books in the series, A Princess of Mars, Gods of Mars, and Warlord of Mars. But alas, poor box office performance and phenomenal losses for Disney, who produced the movie, in the region of some $200 million. So the studio cancelled the sequels. That was inevitable, wasn't it? Leaving this as a standalone adaptation of Burroughs' works. Set primarily in 1968, the movie follows the adventures of the titular character, Captain John Carter, as played by Taylor Kitsch, an ex-American Civil War Confederate Army captain who, whilst trying to evade re-enlistment into the armed forces, inadvertently finds himself transported to another planet, known to its inhabitants as Barsoom, which indeed turns out to be none other than what we would call Mars. Due to differences in his bone density and the planet's low gravity, Carter finds he is stronger, faster, and able to jump higher than ever he would back on Earth, and so is soon noticed by one of the planet's native inhabitants, the Tharks, or Green Martians, and more specifically, their leader, Tars Tarkas, as played by Willem Dafoe, who sees great potential in what Carter may bring to his planet. Carter soon finds himself embroiled in a war between other two rival factions on the planet, the more human-resembling Red Martians, or the great cities of Helium and Z'danga, whereby, to forge peace between the two civilizations, the Princess of Helium, Dejah Thoris, as played by Lynn Collins, and the ruler of Z'danga, Sabthan, as played by Dominic West, are to be wed. But indeed, one such union that may spell the beginning of the end for all on Barsoom. Dejah Thoris, desperate to find a way out of marrying Sabthan, looks to Carter for help in fighting for Helium. However, it transpires that more deceptive forces may be at work than at first glance it would seem. So, this film is considered to be one of the biggest box office failures of recent times, perhaps of all time. Being one of the most expensive films ever made, it failed to recuperate much of the money that was actually spent on its lavish production, and initially failed to win over audiences and critics alike. For me, there are many films that fall into this category, where they have been heavily panned by audiences, critics, or both. Yet in many I have found much to enjoy, regardless, However, I would probably still admit that some had more than their fair share of shortcomings. Now, John Carter, for me, is something rather special. In my book, severely underrated and unjustly berated, just by virtue of the fact that it flopped. To put it simply, it's not without its own flaws. I'm not going to deny that, and faults, but underneath it all, it is simply an excellent science fiction movie with a distinct vision and an abundant sense of old school adventure that provides for a truly satisfying and enthrallingly enjoyable good time. Now, do bear with me on this. From my perspective, I fell in love with this movie, the story and the lore, from the very first viewing, and have been enamoured ever since. It may have lost Disney a considerable fortune. Well, probably the day's takings from one of the theme parks, but this has more to do with the film's marketing and overall budget than anything else. Relatively speaking, the film still performed pretty well, all things considered. Just not enough to recuperate the money spent on its opulent production. It's an indulgent fantasy all ways through, perhaps too indulgent for its own good. It's not hard to see where the money was actually spent. The creation of this whole new world is simply outstandingly detailed and really brings the landscape of Mars into focus, making great use of some of the planet's more famous and curious landmarks. It's got a true sense of adventure running through its veins, with tremendous scope and opportunity, certainly speaking to many of my own childhood dreams and fantasies of visiting other worlds, bringing the same kind of wide-eyed wonderment in every scene, with an almost Jules Verne kind of esque quality that absolutely captivates the imagination. I think where the film falls in it's in its own sense of individuality. Unfortunately, many elements feel recycled, and it's not hard to draw similarities between this and many other science fiction and adventure properties, not least the likes of Dune, Star Wars, Stargate, Planet of the Apes, and even to some extent the likes of Indiana Jones, Superman, and even The Time Machine. And whilst the movie doesn't feel like a mashup or even a jumbled mix of these franchises, the simple fact is that many of the elements from those movies borrowed themselves heavily from Burroughs' works in the first place, to such an extent that there is simply nothing left to provide any kind of USP for John Carter as a workable franchise in its own right. It's not a copy by any stretch, but it fails to kind of step out of the bounds in which it's set and do its kind of own thing, to really drive something new and fantastical. And what we get is thoroughly entertaining nonetheless, but I can certainly see that for many it will feel like rehashed schlock, you know? But it is its own thing. From some of the originally diverse and captivating science fiction source material available, and taken on its own merit, and this merit alone, it certainly deserves a reappraisal every now and again. It might not bring anything new to the world of science fiction, but it certainly more than engages with some fantastically fantastical concepts and operatic storytelling. What I would say is that it does feel very much like it's been heavily influenced by other movies such as Dune and Planet of the Apes. It really does feel like those, if you know, specifically, and certainly carries forward much of their kind of extravagant and exuberant visual charm and styles, and at the very least, and much of their kind of beating and contrasting landscapes. But either way, it's still a fantastic tale of exploration, second chances, redemption, and even love, loss, and heartbreak. It can indeed be a little romantic at times, and from what I understand of the original novels, which I haven't read, they were introduced or intended to be more of a romantic twist on the science fiction genre. The leads do have some heated moments together. Kitsch might be kind of a bit of a blunt instrument for the role per se, but overall, I think he still provides a very invested and involved performance, and kind of balanced against Collins. It's easy to see that there was at least some on-screen chemistry between Carter and Thoris that made the more romanticised elements work for what was needed to carry those aspects of the story forward. For a sci-fi film, it was quite endearing, for what it was. I think the movie also kind of projects quite a lot of detail in a very short space in time, which does make it kind of hard to follow on an initial watch. I know there was certainly, I was certainly lost, in the ether of it all for a while, until kind of some of those pieces started to come together. And I think that kind of approach certainly kind of alienates and kind of puts people off from really kind of connecting and absorbing into the story. It wasn't until I had kind of seen the film again that I could really just kind of sit back and enjoy the ride for the excellent piece of science fiction that it truly was. It does have some fantastically involved, I'm using fantastic a lot, involved action sequences and set pieces throughout. The one thing I would say, however, is that it is sometimes hard to know just who we are supposed to be rooting for. Not because any kind of secret of subterfuge, particularly, but at the arc of the factions involved. For instance, the warriors of both the Helium and Z'Danga are wearing almost identical get-up. It can be quite a jumbled mess in that respect, and a bit of a kind of a head-scratcher as it's moving on. It's an interesting take on space travel, that much, and had so much more potential to be explored in later installments. Enough was given to kind of grasp the main concepts in this entry, but it was certainly teased a wider array of planets and civilizations than what we encountered on this journey in particular, and the geek in me absolutely loved this. Alongside the wonderfully, I'm going to use wonderfully and not fantastically, wonderfully intense visuals and immersive science fiction, we also have a brilliantly evocative and emotive score by Michael Giacco, who yields a number of fantastically, there we go, indulgent themes which completely have us all full of awe and complete spectacle. A totally enriching complement to the overall story, and one which will have you totally enamoured, building a world wonderfully, enticingly, this crescendo towards a competently constructed and rousing signature theme. Overall, this is just simply a totally understated and underrated adventure from the get-go, combining some fantastic characters, space fantasy, romance, and wide-eyed wonderment together with an intriguing and captivating story that brings a completely alien world to life in a brilliantly immersive and engaging way. It's a fun movie that, okay, isn't wholly original by many standards, being very reminiscent of many other science fiction classics which have also cribbed from the same source material. But either way, regardless, it continues to have a tremendous sense of world building with some totally old school science fiction adventure. An adventure made of dreams. I know that it can be a bit cheesy in places. It's indeed not loved by all. It's certainly no Avatar in terms of overall quality. But it is more than a decent attempt to inject and infuse some of Burroughs' fantastical ideas into the series directly related to his works. Definitely capturing a grand and exciting vision with tremendous skill and imagination that ended up being an epic that was just never meant to be. Beautifully shot, directed, and totally immersive. It's not perfect. Some of the effects haven't aged all that well, and it can be a bit formulaic at times. But despite having the stigma of being one of the biggest box office failures ever, it's not a turkey by any standards. It is a tremendously fun concept and a brilliant ride from start to finish. As much as I truly want and still want a sequel to follow the expanded universe we were teased, and although the movie was set up to be part of a trilogy from the start, this isn't actually so concerned with setting up sequels in any great depth. Thankfully, what we do get is a satisfying, self-contained story that leaves you hungry for more. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Many thanks for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. Absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk. Definitely love to have you back. Most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.